I'm Margot Getty from Houston, and about a year and a half ago, we started in partnership with the Vocations Office a candlelight holy hour in the chapel at the seminary with beautiful music, quartet of I think four musicians, and we started out the first time we did it, we do it once a month. The first time we had maybe 12 people. Last month we had over 150. Included in that group were youth and Hispanic families, families bringing their little kids. It's a great idea, and I encourage every club to do something like this.
I would only say, watch how you enculturate it. And I just want to give a quick example. My wife plays oboe, and she's an accomplished oboist. She's a member of the Lodi Community Band, and they formed a quintet and held a concert for Christmas this past year. Well attended, music was absolutely beautiful, and I appreciated it so much. And I just thought it was an interesting contrast, because when I went to Our Lady of Guadalupe Parish in Sacramento, downtown, for the celebration of Our Lady of Guadalupe, that parish, of course, it's the namesake. They start celebrating at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon the night before. They don't stop, they go all night, and they don't stop until about noon the day of the celebration. So they have different bands coming in. I arrived about 9 p.m. and I stayed until about 2 a.m. I heard a charismatic rock and roll band in Spanish. The volume turned all the way up. Lots of drum. They were followed by, well, I'm gonna say it this way, a polka-style marching band in Spanish, playing all the traditional Guadalupe songs, but in polka style. It's norteño. I mean, this is the influence of the German in the Southwest and kind of northern parts of Mexico, and they had the tuba, and it was a marching band. Totally different experience. And then they had the mariachi come in with the traditional sound, which is kind of what I was expecting and looking forward to. But none of it was the calm and serene experience of my wife's group when they did their Christmas quintet. So there's room for all of it, right? And we need to be attentive that we are responding in a way that lifts the hearts of our people.
Ken and Armando, you are welcome to go till 22 if you would like, if you'd like.
Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the Quinto Encuentro, the fifth Encuentro. And I say the word encuentro in Spanish. You know, I think there's about 1 million words in the English language, and it's growing every day. It's kind of a technical culture. In terms of our linguistic culture, we have a word that's very precise and used for every purpose. The Spanish language, I think, has about 150,000 or 200,000 words, much less. And so in the Spanish linguistic culture, we use words with multiple meanings. And if you want to translate from English to Spanish, it usually takes more words in the Spanish because you have to get that precision with multiple words on the Spanish side. On the other hand, it can also happen the other way, because when you say something in Spanish, it's like instead of touching or playing the piano with one finger, it's like playing the piano with all 10 fingers. And you're hearing layers of meaning and harmonies and resonances and arpeggios. And so the one word encuentro in Spanish, it can be translated just as encounter, like I meet you, we have an encounter. It also can be used in a sense of a gathering. In the religious context, it deeply means encounter with Christ, encounter with the faith community, but it also means, in a very specific way, a tradition of gathering and listening to everybody in order to deeply immerse ourselves in the reality of our people and then respond from faith, in light of tradition, to the reality that people are living. And so that's the way that's the primary meaning when we talk about Encuentro in the Hispanic ministry setting in the United States. That's the primary meaning, but all those other layers of meaning are also present. So we choose not to translate it into Fifth Encounter, it's Fifth Encuentro. The first one happened in 1972. It was a response to the Second Vatican Council. The Vatican Council concluded Latin America moved very strongly in their pastoral response to use this Encuentro model, nationally and internationally. They had it was actually their second gathering of the bishops of all of Latin America was held in Medellin, Colombia in 1968. The previous one was pre-Vatican II. The new one brought in a whole new model of approach. And then in 1972, leaders in Hispanic ministry in the United States said, we need to learn from that, we need to take advantage of that methodology, and we'll do it here. So that was the first Encuentro. Happened in 1972. There were only about 250 people present. It happened in Washington, D.C. The next one, in 1979, gathered more people, the second Encuentro, and they started to form regional structures to support Hispanic ministry. And in preparation for the third Encuentro in 1985, they did a very intensive and deep grassroots effort to reach out and hear the voices of people who were engaged but had concerns. And all of that fed into their process. And then from there, the first National Pastoral Plan for Hispanic Ministry was formed by the U.S. bishops, published in 1987. The year 2000 came along, and the Hispanic Ministry Office of the USCCB invited the whole church to Jubilee. Let's celebrate the new millennium, and they called that Encuentro 2000. It was a little bit different process. It didn't have the grassroots consultation. It was a celebration of the millennium. And so here we are, starting in around 2015, the formal preparations began, and the grassroots consultation started in 2017. The national event took place. So it started in parishes and dioceses throughout the country. I think we had about 145 dioceses that took part out of 178 territorial dioceses in the United States. They did the small group and parish processes. They did a diocesan Encuentro, and then they did regional Encuentros. So the colors here on the map represent the 14 Episcopal regions of the United States. Each one had its own Encuentro in the first 6 months or so of 2018. And then in September of 2018, we had the National Encuentro in Fort Worth, Texas. Since then, we've been in a process of reflecting on what was heard. We just published recently the proceedings and conclusions of the Encuentro, and now we're in the process of going back to the regions, going back to the dioceses, and sharing everything that we learned. And so that process will end, and my role with the Encuentro process will end at the end of this year. A big part and a priority in the process, the consultation process, we wanted to hear from young people. We wanted to hear their hopes, their joys, their concerns, the obstacles they experience in the life of the church. And based on the data that we got, we would say that about 20% of the participants at the parish and diocesan level were youth and young adults themselves. So that's a significant number, representing about 28,000 young people that participated in the reflection and mission sessions of the fifth Encuentro. We engaged them, not only the young people, but everybody in the sessions of the Encuentro, to go out to the peripheries, as Pope Francis uses that word, and find people and engage them in conversation about their hopes and dreams, their obstacles, their challenges, and what they would like to receive and contribute to the church. Their gifts and talents, their concerns and their hopes. And so an additional 32,000 young people were encountered in the missionary visits to the peripheries. So some of the things that we'll be looking at come from that consultation. In addition, there were extra efforts for the consultation. We did some demographic analysis. I told you my background was in computer science, sociological research. I mined the data from the Census Bureau. I mined data from the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, from the Pew Research Center. I brought it all together, and we were able to come up with this perspective on the changing demographics of the U.S. Catholic Church. And you can see here, from ages 30 and under, this is the 50% line. All the green shades are the Hispanic Catholics, and then we have the yellow is the white or Caucasian Euro-American Catholics, African American and Asian, Native American and others, including multi-ethnic groups. For the Hispanics, we have it broken down by generation. So immigrants, U.S.-born children of immigrants, and third or higher generation. So like in my case, I estimate I'm a 15th generation Hispanic here in this country. We've been around for a long time. And I'll tell you, my parents both grew up speaking Spanish. They didn't use that as their primary language at our house because they were punished in school for speaking Spanish, and they didn't want us to have to experience that. So for me, it was a language that came to me as an adult. In any case, among these younger generations, the majority of Hispanic young people today are the children of immigrants. So when we talk about Gente Puente, this is a rich resource. People who grew up in this country, had their education in English, but had an experience of language and faith and culture at home that was rooted in the immigrant reality. So they can be bridges. We just need to identify them, recognize the gift they bring, and then empower them to be that for the church. This is, of course, different from one region of the country to another. And so this map shows how in some dioceses, which are the ones in the dark blue, the majority of Catholics already are Hispanic. And in some cases, like El Paso, it might be 98% of the Catholic population there is Hispanic. The ones in dark red, that's dioceses where Hispanics are the largest ethnic group, but not a majority. There is no ethnic or cultural majority in those dioceses, but the Hispanics are the largest. And then in the orange, that's dioceses where Hispanics are the largest among young people. It's the largest minority among young people. Then we have a few more. There's the yellow, dioceses where at least 35% or more of the Catholic children are Hispanic. The brown are dioceses where 25% or more of the Catholic children are Hispanic, and then the light green, 15% or more. The gray would be less than 15%. So just out of curiosity, if you can make out your diocese in this map, how many of you are from a gray-colored diocese? Okay. So the Hispanic presence there is not going to be as strong. I guarantee you will still find parishes where the majority are Hispanic. And so the same principle applies, it's just at a smaller level. How many of you are in one of the light green colored dioceses? Or one of the brown colored dioceses? Now we're getting into an area where it may be worthwhile at the diocesan level to begin strategizing and having those conversations and saying, how do we reach the breadth of this population in all the different parishes where they are? How many of you are in yellow colored dioceses? Orange. Just a few of you. And then red. Okay, so these are places where there's a substantial number. Okay, maybe I call this red. And I'm calling this blue. So if
No one was ever going to raise their hand.
Okay. All right, this is yellow. This is brown. You know what? On my screen, it looks perfect. So, but the point is that, if you're in one of these dioceses where there really is a large established Hispanic population, you need to engage that community and find what are the solutions that make sense for that group. I mean, it may mean having multiple different structures of leadership and an activity in one diocese, or it may mean having, like Armando was saying, it's under one umbrella, but there are times when you form groups and you do breakout sessions and you work to address different experiences and different realities to have a comprehensive and complex response to a comprehensive and complex reality. So that's what we're looking at. I'll move through this very quickly. We broke this down by region, and we show the number of active, retired, and retired Hispanic priests. There's a total, and one of the, Armando mentioned, and we see in the statistics, the Hispanic population in the U.S. is a young population. It's also true among the priests. Only, I think, a little bit less than 10% of our Hispanic priests are retired, and that's a lower percentage than overall in the U.S. Yet, roughly 3/4 of our Hispanic priests are foreign-born. And that's still true even looking at the seminarians. So that's a problem when you look back at the population, and so many of our young people today are not foreign-born, they're US-born. And so having a foreign-born Hispanic priest may still not, he needs support and maybe study to understand how to reach this US-born generation. Just like an Anglo would, or an African American would, or a Vietnamese would. And so this is where it really hits home. We looked at the data across the world and compared the number of Catholics in each region of the world to the number of priests. Here in the United States, we're actually among the wealthiest areas in the world in terms of priests. We're priest wealthy. We have more priests per Catholic than any place in the world except for Europe. Of course, over there, it also tends to be a whole lot more that are retirement age. If you look at the white non-Hispanic Catholics in the United States, we have one priest for every 12 or 1,300 one white priest for every 12 or 1,300 white Catholics. That's even higher than Europe. We have white priests galore. We say we're suffering from a priest shortage, and it's true. We could always use more priests. But relative to the rest of the world, we have twice as many for the white Catholics. For Hispanics, with the immigrant Hispanics, it's almost the same as Latin America. We have a little bit less. It's one for every 8,000. One Latin American-born Catholic priest for every 8,000 Latin American-born Catholics in the United States. Where it's really a harsh reality is when you look at the US-born Hispanics. There's one US-born Hispanic priest for every 16,000 US-born Hispanic Catholics. This is the evidence of the disconnect that Armando has been talking about in the parishes and in the diocesan level ministries. We're not reaching them. I don't think it's true, and I believe in my heart it's not true, that God has stopped calling US-born Hispanics to the priesthood and religious life. I don't believe that. God is calling. But we are not preparing hearts as fertile ground to receive the call. And we have neglected, especially the US-born Hispanic young people. So that's where we're saying new solutions, new wine for new wineskins. We need to find a more adequate response. Just a little bit of information, if you want. We have detailed statistical reports for every diocese in the country. And you can go to our website, viencuentro.org, V for 5, Encuentro, ENCUENTRO.org. And if you just go to this second menu tab, Diocesan Participation, it brings up a list, and down here on the right column, for every diocese organized by region, so this is Region 1, Boston, Bridgeport, and so on. If you just scroll down, you'll come to the different regions in the country, and there's an English and a Spanish report that will show you what percentage of your young people are Hispanic, white, African American, and so forth. It'll tell you how many Hispanic priests you have, how many Hispanic lay ecclesial ministers, how many Hispanic deacons, how many Hispanic religious, and so forth. So all of that information is available on the website. Find out what the reality is in your own backyard. And now I'm going to pass it back to Armando to talk a little bit about an online survey that we did.
Into the nitty gritty on what are young people actually saying? What are the Hispanic young people saying? Why are they saying what they're saying? You look at those statistics and you're like, yeah, you're right. Where are the U.S.-born Hispanic priests? In some senses, youth ministries do the same thing. We feel that young people who are born here and who speak English and Spanish, well, they're the easiest to catch, right? They speak both languages. They can choose between Spanish ministries and English ministries. They can choose anything that they want. Then why aren't we engaging them? Because in fact, yes, we have more choices, but we actually choose less. Because neither fits what I'm looking for. I go to the English speaking. Well, I don't speak English right now that well because I go to Spanish Mass and this youth group is in English. Well, I'll go to the Spanish youth group. Yeah, but that's too Hispanic and I'm not that Hispanic. And that reality is the reason why I choose neither. And if we go with statistics, you need to be involved, you need to be engaged, you need to go to conferences, I'm choosing to go to neither. And then I'm surprised why there's no US-born Hispanic priests. And it all, unfortunately, becomes a terrible cycle. Because if I'm looking at a priest and saying, oh, were you born here? No, I was born from Mexico. Oh, well, were you born here? Because you'd have the same experience that I did growing up. No, I'm sorry, I don't have that experience. Then when do I see that experience come to life? So all of a sudden, this negative cycle continues to happen, and it impacts the way vocations occur in our whole country. When we asked the young people about this survey, we wanted to highlight a few things, which was really fascinating when we asked them. You can, if you get the statistics, there's a book up here about the fifth Encuentro and the results of the fifth Encuentro, which gives you more information. But we wanted just to give you some quick highlights. What are the young people saying in regards to a survey? A little over 1,000 people responded to this survey. This is what they said, right? These are the themes of what was focused on. The changing demographics that they're seeing, language generation and education. More and more are finally seeing education and attaining education. We saw for the longest time, we were even missing that. They weren't getting educated, right? The education was a big barrier of entry, and that was one of the biggest problems. Evangelization and catechesis, formation and leadership, listening and accompaniment, which we talked about earlier, casting a bigger net, common challenges. Here are the two that I wanted to focus on. Number one, formation for leadership and ministry. The young people themselves are saying, we want to be leaders in ministry. We want formation, but we don't know how to get it. It's not accessible to us. You expect me as a young person to go to the diocesan office that's 2 hours away to go get a class. I'm not going to do that. I'm used to online formation, and you have none of that. I'm online in social media. I never hear your message. So every place where I am, you're not. And everything I'm reading, you don't have available to me. So I guess I'll go another direction. But when we ask them through the survey, what is it that you're looking for? We want to, and this is a really big word for Pope Francis, we want to be protagonists, right? Who's a protagonist in a movie, right? The person in charge, the person that's doing the stuff, the star. We want to be protagonists in the story of the church, but we're not really given places to do that. Again, I go to the Hispanic community, and well, they already have everybody they need, and they want me to do it, and I'm like, no, you guys are too Hispanic. English speaking, I don't know that ministry really well. I don't fit in there, so I go to neither. Again, the same problem continues to occur. Even though I do speak both languages, even though I could fit, but I choose not to. See, a lot of people assume that because I speak both languages that I can just easily jump in. And if I'm an extrovert, which I tend to be, which is why I like jumping in, I will do that. But the majority need someone to journey with them through that process. When I answered your question, which was a great question about finding the bridge people, right? Don't make the mistake that a lot of people make with me. A lot of people now call me from the diocese or across the nation. They're like, we need you to be the representative of Hispanics. You want to be the representative of Hispanics? That's a really tall order. And actually, I have to tell you a secret. I have my own bridge people with the Hispanic community. I'm no longer, it's so interesting actually. I have two masters. I have a master's in business and a master's in theology. The more educated I got, the more involved in the English-speaking ministry I got, meant the more I left my mom's style of mass and church and ministry. Does that make sense? Because I was so, I've put everything into this English-speaking ministry that I've stopped going to the Spanish charismatic group that I first started attending. I now only go to English mass. I rarely go, unless it's a feast day and I'm with my family, I go to mass in Spanish, but I rarely go in Spanish. So when you say to me, well, I need you to represent the Hispanics, hold on, let me go ask them what they want. Because I am not sometimes that best representative anymore. Because the majority of my time is now spent in the English community. Does that make sense? And so when I say be careful about the bridge builder, find the bridge builder who still is connected to that community and don't bring him or her in so much that you've taken them away from the very group that you want to reach out to. Because we do that more often than not. Because you're so busy, you're so excited. Finally, we got a Hispanic. Stay here, sit here, I'll teach you everything in English. Well, in all of that, you're starting to pull them away from the community you want to eventually reach. And they'll gladly take it. I mean, I'm gladly involved in English-speaking things. But I have to also be honest with myself and say, you know what, let me call my friend Gustavo. He's still really involved with Jóvenes para Cristo. He goes to that youth group every single Thursday. If I want to know what the youth, Hispanic youth are thinking, I have to go to Gustavo. Because Armando also goes to the English-speaking ministry, goes to the Vietnamese, goes to the Korean youth group. I'm now just a blend of things. I can no longer be a sole good advocate for that community. Does that make sense? And so a lot of times we make that mistake because we do bring the Hispanic person to my committee. And now look, we have the Hispanic guy. Armando will fix the Serra club and bring all the Hispanics in. I usually have to ask the question, how Hispanic is that Hispanic? Because if he's speaking to you in English, you should actually check if he even speaks Spanish. Because a lot of times, that also is a reality. I was born and raised in Orange County. And because of my dad's strictness, I speak Spanish. But the majority of people in my cohort of Hispanics going to school, they've lost their Spanish. They'll tell you they speak Spanish because it'll get them a better raise or a job. But when you actually start talking to them, not quite there, right? But that is the reality. Those bridge people are asking and are saying to you, I want to be formed. Let me be a protagonist. Put me in a role of leadership. But that means you got to open those doors. And they're not necessarily, they're saying it. See, this is what's interesting. They're saying it to us at Encuentro, where you weren't. So they're saying it to somebody that you need to find so that you can connect them. How do we make these connections happen? Because you want them and they exist, but there's this barrier, somehow veil that exists that's not making the connection happen. And yet they're saying, bring some formation and I'll totally do it. What language do you want it in? I don't know. If you're asking me, I don't care, English or Spanish, I'll take it. But offer it, right? Find me and offer it so that I can learn it from you. But I need a mentor to guide me through it. Right? I need you to accompany me on this journey.
And a mentor that understands me. It's important that, especially for young people, they're not going to go someplace where they don't feel comfortable. They're not going to go someplace where they don't see themselves reflected in the reality of the community. So having those bridge people take leadership and helping them to understand and practice accompaniment in a way where they really see the young people and they take the time to listen and engage and form relationship with these young people to help them feel comfortable. And then their gifts flourish, they flower, they offer them with very, very open hearts for the good of others.
Yeah. But it does take knowing, and that we put a USCCB put out a resource called Building Intercultural Competence, and sometimes it does take, because it takes time, it takes patience. You know, if I went to your parish, to your Serra group, and you started, and this was my very first English community, and we prayed the Our Father, and I didn't pray it. If no one accompanied me through that journey and said, it's okay, pray in Spanish, that's fine, I might never come back. Not because I don't care about the mission or you or what you have, simply because no one journeyed with me and said, that's okay, right? We need people to accompany. We need people who have intercultural competency skills so that they can accompany and listen and remind people of their discernment and their vocational call. But we need that kind of leadership. And maybe that's you, or maybe that's you finding the bridge person who will do that. But we need that action step, or else it's not going to happen. Because I get the questions all the time, well, okay, let's be honest. How about, I thought Hispanics are all about the faith. Why don't we have more Hispanic priests? I'm like, you want the truth? The truth is, yes, we're all about the faith. But if an immigrant family is here and they've worked their butt off to try to give the best to their kids, as much as that mom and dad want priests in their family, they're pushing the doctor. They're pushing be an architect. They're pushing be something because I've worked so hard. I want you to make something of yourself. No one's going to say, don't become a priest. They're just not saying it, if that makes sense. And you can't fault them for that, because sometimes that's just where life has taken them. They've worked so hard for what they've done that they just want their son or daughter to have the same thing. You know, my dad was really strict with Spanish, but I've known parents who say to their kids, I don't want you to speak Spanish. I've been made fun of for my English. I want you to have perfect Spanish. And what ends up happening is sometimes that makes the relationship between mom, dad, and child difficult because they don't speak the same language at home. Now that's another issue that we have to deal with, right? But the parents are just doing the very best they can to give their child the very best life that they think is going to work, right? But we're so busy saying, forget about that, let's talk about vocations. Well, they're dealing with so many other issues that we're not even ready for vocations conversation. So, you know, Ken kind of alluded to it, but how are we engaging families in a way that really is ministering, serving them, and ready to create those vocations that we're all yearning for? Make sense? Kind of last piece on the conversation with the youth that they were saying to us. Young people do feel rejected, discriminated against. Young people do feel like sometimes the church, just because I'm not sure yet what I want, the church makes me feel like I'm judged. Just because I may be questioning my sexuality because society's telling me to question it, all of a sudden then the church is no longer a place for me. And we should be places where we welcome these conversations. Again, this is all about accompanying. If we accompany and listen, we can then take on these challenging, difficult conversations. But when they feel judged or discriminated against, they disappear, never to come back to the church. One of the things that was interesting, both in the results of the online survey and in just my experience of the Encuentro in my diocese, is that people are hungering to talk about discernment and vocation. All young people want to know what they want to do with their lives. When I was growing up and I was thinking of going to college, I was the first one to go to college in my family. I had no one to talk to about what I should do with my life. I would have loved a mentor that told me, well, listen, there's UCs and there's CSUs and there's community colleges. I had a counselor who told me, what does your dad do? And I said, he's a gardener and he works in construction. Have you thought of of doing that? You know? So that was my support, right? I can go to my dad and my dad's like, well, I only went to second grade, buddy. I'm sorry. Like, I can talk to my mom. I only went to sixth grade. I'm sorry. Right? I would have loved a mentor to help me discern where should I go, what are the opportunities out there. Sometimes Hispanics don't have that because we are first generation. I mean, I know my dad's social security. I knew it since I was in high school because I used to impersonate him on the phone because the phone company would call and my dad's like, I don't know what they're saying. You say something. Dad, what do you want me to say? So I was Fermin Cervantes for I don't know how long, right? Sir, what's your social security? Here it is. I'm saying mine, not yours, right? But that was my reality, right? That was my reality because even today, to this day, my dad would be like, I don't speak English. I'm like, yeah, you do. You prefer Spanish and you're more comfortable and you just don't want to be judged by your accent. But at the end of the day, you do speak it. You've been here for, 30 years, right? But the reality is that is a reality that our families are dealing with. And sometimes that's the barrier before we even talk about anything else. But we don't even think of those things. We just jump those things and want to talk straight about what you're not doing as a family, how you should be talking about more about vocations. And we're just missing the needs that are there so that we can get good vocation conversations. How do we take those into consideration? It takes knowing, it takes listening, it takes hearing the voice of our young people and then saying, I'm willing to do something about it. How do we cast a bigger net? How do we create youth groups where they don't exist? Why is it that in the Diocese of Orange, I'm not going to speak for any other diocese, but in the Diocese of Orange, the youth minister gets a salary and the youth minister gets a budget to work with youth. But if that youth minister doesn't do an effort to engage Vietnamese or Hispanic speaking young people, they don't get served. When I go to that youth group, I'm like, oh, that's cool. What are you guys doing? Oh, we're working on retreat. We're doing this. And then I go to the Spanish group and I'm like, hey, do you guys get the same budget that the youth minister does? No. We have to do our own fundraising. Why in the same parish do we have those realities? Why don't we have spaces the same ways? Why do some places just have no youth group when we know that the statistics say if people are involved, they are more apt to get vocations? How do we create retreats? Retreats are becoming more and more opportunities are becoming more and more expensive. And a lot of times some pastors say, I don't want retreats anymore. Instead of them going on a weekend, why don't they just go to the hall and spend a day on retreat? And I, as a diocesan director, have been saying, no, please don't do that. Because a retreat offers an opportunity to pray, to reflect. Getting away from your normal situation offers you a great opportunity. How are we losing opportunities for reflection when we lose retreats? How do we create gatherings that are serving the Spanish speaking? Maybe they're just bilingual like we talked about with the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. Or maybe there's two separate ones. Whatever it is, I'm not here to advocate one way or the other. I'm here to know your audience and make a response that's going to engage more young people. Because the Latinos themselves, the Hispanics will tell you. I have no problem telling you if you ask me. I've just never been asked. I have no problem being a part of a community. I've just never been approached. I might have a few questions for you first because I don't know exactly what you're talking about. But if you're willing to be patient with me, I'm ready to listen. I want to be a protagonist, but no one's asking me. And the only one that's telling me is my mom, and she's telling me to be a lector, and that's probably the best I can do right now. When we can do so much more.
I want to share a story, and it's actually written up in this book called Our Catholic Children, Nuestros Jóvenes Católicos. It's a bilingual book published by our Sunday Visitor Press. And it's a profile of a parish in Texas where the pastor needed somebody to work with the kids for confirmation. So he probably put a notice in the bulletin and got a volunteer. And this gentleman came with a vision of casting a bigger net. And he had, that first year, he had about a dozen students in his class. And he said, you know what? Our parish is bigger than that. We have more kids than that. What can we do? So he went to the pastor and he said, Father, I need more money. And he said, I want a budget of about $8,000 so we can really do a better job of reaching out. And Father said, well, you're asking me to multiply your budget by 8 times. This is like a huge increase. And he said, Father, we've had $1,000 in the budget for years. We've never touched it. I'm just asking you to give me back what is already owed to us. And so he did. He got it through. Over time, they started multiplying programs. Today, they have 18 youth ministry programs, youth and young adult ministry programs in the parish. They have 50 groups. They reach over 1,000 kids and young adults every year. And they have 200 volunteers. That's what this is about, is recognizing that we might have, and it's interesting in the book, what are some of those groups? They have a tutoring group, and they have young people coming in to tutor their younger peers. They have a quinceañera program. They have scripture study for those who want to encounter the Word of God in a deeper way than they would just get in youth ministry by itself. They have the big youth ministry, which is like kind of the thing that brings everybody in, and they've got about 150 to 200 kids that are involved in that, and they break it up into small groups. But beyond that, it's all these other programs. They have outreach. They have service activities in the community. all kinds of things. And it was all based on what are the needs and what are the gifts in our community, and let's respond to that. So that's what we're talking about here. Let's not get muddled in this idea that, well, we have to have one youth group, or if we have a second youth group, we're dividing the church. No, we're forming communities, and the more the merrier. We're all one big community, but let's bring this down to a level where people can actually relate to one another, and let's reach that 1,000 or 2,000 young people that we know are out there.
So my last piece before I let Ken close up is this what we call the acculturation process. And the reason why I like sharing this with you is because I feel that it's easy to sometimes say Hispanic Latinos and we just generalize. I'm going to divide it up for you into 4 groups that I divide them up into when I'm trying to minister and finding ways to respond and serve them. So this was actually from Ken's book that I stole it from. So maybe he should be talking about this. But I really like it because it does 2 things. It tells you there are Hispanics out there who have a focus and a desire to frequent or intentional interaction with the people of their culture of origin. So when I was born into a family who was Mexican. That's what I was born into. Now, as I grow, I am starting to get into the host culture or the Americanized way of society. Because of that, I start having a wrestling within me. Am I more Mexican? Am I more American? Am I more this? Am I more that? And some people struggle with it a lot longer. Some people struggle with it a lot less. Some people don't feel that they're either one or the other. But this is kind of a wrestling that's happening amongst all U.S. Hispanic students, all U.S. Hispanic young people, especially if their parents are immigrants, because the culture is much stronger in the immigrant parents. So what ends up happening is you have 4 different groups. The bicultural is the person who is basically accepting or intentionally engaging with both aspects of themselves, right? I am listening to Spanish music on my radio, but I'm also going to English stuff. I'm reading in Spanish like I am reading in English. I am engaging both aspects, right? There's the assimilation group. This is the group and a group of my friends who said, you know what? I'm born here. I'm Americanized. I am an American. Forget where I'm from. It doesn't matter anymore. Everyone here who has come has assimilated. I'm just going to assimilate, right? That's what I prefer. That's what I like to do. So that's the assimilated group. This is the group that can choose English or Spanish group. This group chooses English-speaking group, right? The next group is what we call the marginalized group, right? This group separates themselves from both the host culture and their own culture of origin. You say, well, that's weird. How can they separate themselves? Well, actually, this is your group who ends up sometimes in jail. This is your group who ends up, because they reject both. As humans, we still need to connect with someone. This is your group who sometimes ends up in a game because they choose something different that's not the American style or their own cultural style. And then there's the group that we call the separated group. The group who chooses, I am going to be Mexican because that's where my parents are from, and I'm going to drive the stereotypical truck with the Our Lady of Guadalupe and the Mexican flag behind it. I mean, I had to come up with something, Ken. I had to come up. I didn't know what else to say. That's what popped in my mind. All right? But why do I share this with you? Because I found in Ken's book that this divided up well the Hispanic Latino community. When we market, try to connect, try to talk to them, we talk to them as a homogeneous group. But they're not a homogeneous group. In fact, it's because of these separate aspects, that's why sometimes our message never reaches them. This group needs a Spanish conversation. This group won't go to anything in English. This group won't go to anything in Spanish. This group is who we want to reach, but they require some extra accompanying because they can go to either one, but they choose what we've learned today. They choose neither. The marginalized group is the hardest one. You have to go out and find them because they're actually rejecting everything. What happened? Go see Father Doyle. This is to me one of the kind of the secret aspects of good marketing and good engagement. I know the community, I know how to connect with them, and I'm speaking directly to them. I'm not just assuming that because I translated my flyer in Spanish, now all Hispanics are going to flock to my group, right? I am actually willing to make some intentionality with the way I engage, the way I speak, and the way I market. When we're talking about gente puente, bridge people, if you really want to engage, you might need bridge people from different groups to truly speak to the heart and soul of that Hispanic Latino young person. Amen? Okay.
So we planned more content than we had time to deliver. And I'm just going to go to the top recommendations. So coming back from the Encuentro, we listened to 350,000 people, 60,000 young people. What are the things about vocation that we really heard them saying with some urgency? And these are the 4 things that came up. Number 1, we encourage vocations in families and parishes. It's not either or, it has to be both and. Utilizing social media and culturally adapted resources in both English and Spanish. It's about meeting the person where they are and not setting up artificial prerequisites before they can hear the message. Second, actively promote Hispanic vocations with pathways for both US-born and immigrant young people, including those who are undocumented. That's what they're asking for. It's not easy. We don't have easy solutions to that situation of the undocumented. There is an in-between group right now, the DACA recipients, people who, should I use a different mic? Okay. The people who were born elsewhere but came at an early age, and right now they are under no threat for deportation. They have a right to study, they have a right to work. It's temporary. So that's a situation where we need to really think it through, get the folks in vocation ministries at the diocesan level, even at the national level, and say. And number 4, distribute bilingual materials to promote all vocations in the church. And we heard this a lot from the consultation. Vocation is not just priesthood and religious life. In the Hispanic community, there's a real challenge right now in marriage. There are many Hispanic families. There are many Hispanic families in the U.S. today that are not benefiting of the grace of the sacrament of matrimony. And it's true across the board, but it's even more prevalent in the Hispanic community. So let's provide that catechesis, faith formation to our young people, that vocation includes marriage and family life. Also the committed single life. It's also about how we are Christ bearers in the world. We are baptized, we have a mission, not just to our family, not just to our faith community, but to the whole world. How do we bring that light of the gospel beyond our insular community and to the whole world? That also needs to be part of youth ministry. So those are the 4 things that really stood out in the Encuentro consultation. And I thank you for your attention. If anybody wants to stay and ask a few more questions, we're happy to respond. I just want to say, I think I've known Armando for about 12 years now, 13 maybe. This is the first time that we have presented together, and it's been a delight for me. So I thank you for this opportunity to work with my brother.